The text came at 7:23 a.m. on a Saturday, 3 hours before we were supposed to leave for Marcus's graduation ceremony. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, still in my pajamas, when my phone buzzed against the marble countertop. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Can you wear something else today? Maybe the navy dress from Easter? Mom. I stared at the message, blinking away the morning fog. Something else? I glanced down at the outfit I'd carefully laid out the night before, draped across my bedroom chair like a promise. An emerald green wrap dress that hugged my curves in all the right places, paired with nude heels and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me. I'd even gotten my hair done yesterday, soft waves that cascaded past my shoulders, because this was Marcus's big day. He graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in finance. 4 years of late-night study sessions, internships, and stress that had finally led to this moment. I texted back, "What's wrong with what I plan to wear?" The 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then it appeared again. Then, nothing for 2 full minutes. Finally. "Just trust me on this one, sweetheart." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Maybe she was right. Maybe the green was too bold, too attention-grabbing for a family photo. I trudged upstairs and pulled the navy dress from my closet, the same one I'd worn to Easter dinner at Aunt Patricia's house. It was fine. Safe. The kind of dress that whispered instead of spoke. By 10:15, we were all packed into Dad's black Suburban, driving through the tree-lined streets of Evanston toward the campus. Mom sat in the passenger seat, checking her makeup, in the visor mirror for the 3rd time. She looked perfect, as always. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her cream-colored blazer pressed to perfection, her jewelry minimal but expensive. Dad wore his charcoal suit, the one he reserved for important occasions, his silver watch glinting as he gripped the steering wheel, and there was me in the back seat, drowning in navy fabric that washed out my complexion, feeling like I was wearing someone else's skin. "Did you remember the good camera?" Mom asked Dad, her voice carrying that particular edge it got when she was orchestrating something important. "It's in the trunk, along with the backup batteries and the tripod," he replied. "Rebecca, you did bring those printouts of the photo locations, right?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure why we needed a detailed plan for taking pictures. It was a graduation, not a wedding. But Mom had spent weeks researching the best spots on Northwestern's campus, printing out photos from other families' graduation posts, mapping out our route like we were planning a military operation. Marcus was already at the campus, getting ready with his roommates in his apartment near campus. We'd meet him at the ceremony, then spend the afternoon taking what Mom called memory photos around the university grounds. She'd been talking about these photos for months, ever since Marcus walked across the stage at his high school graduation 4 years ago, and she'd been disappointed with how the family portraits turned out. "This time will be different," she'd said then. "This time we'll get it right." The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful, held in the university's main auditorium, with hundreds of families packed into red velvet seats, the air thick with pride and anticipation. When they called Marcus William Chen's name, we all stood and cheered. He walked across that stage with his shoulders back and his head high, shaking hands with the dean, accepting his diploma with a grin that could have powered the whole building. I felt tears prick at my eyes. My little brother, who used to build pillow forts in our living room and beg me to read him one more story before bed, was now a college graduate. 22 years old and ready to take on the world with his job offer at Goldman Sachs already secured. After the ceremony, we found Marcus in the crowd of graduates outside the auditorium. He looked sharp in his cap and gown, the tassel hanging perfectly to the side, his face flushed with excitement and accomplishment. "We did it!" he shouted as he hugged each of us in turn. When he got to me, He lifted me off the ground and spun me around, just like he used to when we were kids and he'd grown taller than me seemingly overnight. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered in his ear as he set me down. "Couldn't have done it without my big sister," he whispered back, and my heart swelled. "All right, family," Mom announced, pulling out her phone and consulting her list. "Photo time. We're starting at the main quad, then moving to the library steps and finishing at the arch by the lake." We followed her like dutiful soldiers. Marcus, still glowing with post-graduation euphoria, Dad carrying the camera equipment, me trying to keep up in heels that were already pinching my feet. The main quad was stunning, with ancient oak trees casting dappled shadows across manicured lawns, Gothic Revival buildings rising majestically against the blue May sky. "Perfect lighting," Mom murmured, surveying the scene like an artist examining a blank canvas. "Marcus, you stand here, right in the center. David, you go to his right, I'll go to his left." I started to move toward the group, but Mom held up her hand. "Actually, Rebecca, could you take the first few shots? Just family, you know, parents and graduates." I stopped mid-step, confused. "But I am family." Mom's smile was tight, apologetic, but firm. "Of course you are, honey. We'll get plenty of shots with you later. But first I want some classic portraits. Just the three of us with Marcus." Something twisted in my chest, but I told myself it made sense. Parents with their graduating son. It was traditional, normal. I took the camera from Dad and spent the next 10 minutes photographing them in various poses, adjusting angles, making sure Marcus's tassel was straight, ensuring Mom's blazer lay perfectly. They looked beautiful together. A perfect family portrait in cream and charcoal and graduation regalia, with the historic university buildings providing an elegant backdrop. Every shot was magazine-worthy. "Okay, now some with Rebecca," Marcus said after we'd taken what felt like 50 photos of the three of them. But Mom was already checking her watch. "We need to move to the library steps while the light is still good. We can add Rebecca into the mix at the next location." So we packed up and walked across campus to the library, where the limestone steps created a grand, sweeping backdrop. Once again, I found myself behind the camera, capturing image after image of my parents and brother. Mom directed each shot, with the precision of a professional photographer, adjusting postures, smoothing hair, ensuring every detail was perfect. "The light is incredible here," she kept saying. "These are going to be the ones we frame." By the time we reached the final location, the arch by Lake Michigan, the sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting everything in golden hues. The water sparkled behind the stone archway, and Marcus looked like something out of a movie in his cap and gown. "This is it," Mom announced. "The money shot." I raised the camera again, ready to capture what would surely be the most beautiful photos of the day. But as I looked through the viewfinder at my family arranged beneath the arch, something inside me finally snapped. "Wait," I said, lowering the camera. "I haven't been in a single photo yet." Mom turned to me with that same tight smile. "Oh, sweetie, we've been so focused on getting the perfect shots. Of course we'll get some with you. Actually," she continued, and her voice carried a different tone now, something I'd heard before but never quite recognized. "Maybe it would be better if you stayed behind the camera. You're so good at it, and honestly, the composition works. Better with just the three of us. You know how family photos can get cluttered?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Cluttered. "What do you mean, cluttered?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Mom glanced at Dad, then at Marcus, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I just mean, you know, for the photos we're going to display, the ones that will go on the Christmas cards and in the frames, on the piano, sometimes less is more cohesive." "Cohesive," I repeated slowly. "The aesthetic is just cleaner with the three of us," Mom continued, her voice gaining confidence now that she'd started down this path. "Your father and I in our neutrals, Marcus in his cap and gown. It's classic, timeless, adding another person, especially in... She gestured vaguely at my navy dress. Well, it just changes the whole composition. I looked down at the dress she'd insisted I wear, the one that made me feel invisible, and suddenly everything clicked into place. She hadn't wanted me to wear the green dress because it would have made me stand out. She'd wanted me in the navy because it would make me fade into the background, or better yet, disappear entirely. So I'm the clutter, I said quietly. Rebecca, don't be dramatic, Mom sighed. It's not personal. It's just about the photos. But it was personal. It was the most personal thing in the world, because in that moment, standing on the beautiful Northwestern campus with Lake Michigan sparkling behind us, and my brother's graduation day turning into something ugly, I realized this wasn't about photos at all. This was about who belonged in the story my family wanted to tell about themselves. And apparently, I wasn't part of that story. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. Mom, maybe we should just take a few with all of us. Of course we will, Mom said quickly. But first, let me get a few more of this grouping. The light is changing and I want to make sure we have options. So I stood there, holding the camera, watching my family pose without me for the 100th time that day. And with each click of the shutter, something inside me began to shift. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but underneath it, something else was building. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Anger. Clear, clean anger that cut through years of confusion and self-doubt. Because I was starting to understand that this wasn't the first time I'd been edited out of the picture. This was just the first time it had been said out loud. Standing there with the camera in my hands, watching my family arrange themselves for yet another photo without me, my mind began to wander backward through time. It was like somebody had suddenly turned on a light in a room I'd been stumbling through, in the dark for years. The first memory that surfaced was from my own high school graduation, 6 years earlier. I'd been valedictorian at Riverside High, worked 4 years to earn that honor, staying up until 2 a.m. most nights to maintain my 4.0 GPA, while Marcus got to be the fun kid who played video games and barely scraped by with B's and C's. I remembered walking across that stage, diploma in hand, looking out into the audience to find my family. They were there, of course, sitting in the third row. But when it came time for photos afterward, something similar had happened. Mom had been concerned about my graduation cap sitting crooked, about how my hair looked messy underneath it, about how my gown was wrinkled from sitting through the ceremony. Maybe we should just get a few professional portraits done later, she'd suggested. When we can control the lighting better. Those professional portraits never happened. Marcus had broken his wrist skateboarding the next week, and somehow my graduation got pushed aside for his doctor visits and physical therapy appointments. My achievement became a footnote to his injury. But now, standing at Northwestern, I was remembering other things too. Things I'd filed away as isolated incidents, little disappointments that I'd told myself didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, like my 21st birthday party. I'd wanted to have a small celebration at home, nothing fancy, just family, and a few close friends. But Mom had insisted on planning it, and when the day came, every detail had been chosen to accommodate everyone else's preferences, but mine. The menu was Marcus's favorite foods because he's going through a growth spurt and needs to eat. The decorations were in pastels because Dad was sensitive to bright colors. Even the music was kept low because it might give your grandmother a headache. I'd spent my own birthday party feeling like a guest at someone else's event, or the time I'd gotten accepted to Columbia University for my master's program in journalism. I'd worked for 2 years to save money for the application fees, had spent countless hours crafting the perfect personal statement, and had networked with professors and professionals to get stellar recommendation letters. When the acceptance email came, I'd been so excited I'd called Mom immediately. "That's wonderful, honey," she'd said, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm I'd expected. "Though I do worry about you being so far from home, and Columbia is so expensive. Are you sure this is practical?" 3 days later, Marcus had gotten accepted to Northwestern, and suddenly our house was filled with celebration. Dad took him out for dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in town. Mom called every relative to share the news. They'd even thrown him a small party, complete with a cake that said "Future CEO" in blue frosting. My Columbia acceptance had been mentioned to exactly 3 people: my grandmother, my Aunt Patricia, and our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, and only because she'd asked directly about my plans. The disparity hadn't escaped me then, but I'd rationalized it. Marcus was younger. This was his first time getting into college. He needed more encouragement. I was older, more independent. I didn't need as much validation. I was the responsible one, the one who could handle things on her own. Except now, watching them pose for their 15th photo without me, I was starting to see a different pattern. I thought about last Christmas, when Mom had carefully arranged all the presents under the tree for the annual Christmas morning photo she posted on Facebook every year. She'd spent an hour making sure everything looked perfect, adjusting the ribbon on packages, fluffing the tree skirt, positioning the presents just so. Marcus's gifts had been prominently displayed in the front: his new laptop, wrapped in elegant silver paper with a huge red bow, the Northwestern sweatshirt he'd requested, and the expensive watch from Dad. My gifts had been tucked in the back, smaller packages wrapped in leftover paper from previous years. When someone in the comments had asked about the beautiful presentation, Mom had replied, "I just love making Christmas morning magical for Marcus. He gets so excited about the holidays." No mention of me being excited. No acknowledgement that I'd spent 3 weeks making handmade gifts for everyone, that I'd flown home from my job in Chicago, that I'd been the one who helped her clean the house and prep the Christmas dinner while Marco slept until noon, or the family vacation to Martha's Vineyard 2 summers ago. Mom had planned the whole trip, booked a beautiful rental house with ocean views, and carefully coordinated everyone's schedules. But when it came time to decide on activities, somehow every single day revolved around things Marcus wanted to. Joey wanted to go deep-sea fishing, so we spent a whole day on a boat where I got seasick and couldn't eat for 12 hours afterward. He wanted to try that new trendy restaurant that had a 2-hour wait, so we stood in line while I suggested 3 other places that looked equally good with no wait time. When I'd mentioned wanting to visit the local art galleries, something I'd been looking forward to for months, Mom had sighed and said, "Oh, honey, you know Marcus gets bored with that stuff. Can't you just look them up online?" I'd spent that vacation taking photos of everyone else enjoying their perfect family moments, documenting memories I wasn't really part of. The worst part was the family photo from that trip. We'd hired a professional photographer to take portraits, on the beach at sunset. When the proof came back, there was one shot that was absolutely stunning. Mom and Dad looked relaxed and happy. Marcus was laughing at something the photographer had said, and the golden light was hitting everyone perfectly. Except me. In that photo, I looked tense, forced, like I was trying too hard to fit into a space that wasn't meant for me. My smile looked fake, my posture was stiff, and somehow the lighting just didn't hit me the same way it hit everyone else. Mom had chosen that photo for the Christmas cards that year. "It's the best one of your father. And Marcus," she'd explained when I'd gently suggested maybe we could use one of the other shots. "And you look fine, honey. Maybe a little tired, but fine." Fine. That word had followed me my whole life. My achievements were fine. My appearance was fine. My contributions were fine. Never excellent, never beautiful, never essential. Just fine. I thought about my job as a marketing coordinator at a Chicago-based nonprofit. I'd started there 3 years ago, fresh out of college, and had worked my way up from an intern position. Last month, I'd landed the biggest donor in the organization's history, a corporate partnership that would fund our youth programs for the next 5 years. When I'd called to share the news, Dad had said, "That's great, Rebecca. Your mother and I are proud of you." But when Marcus had gotten promoted to senior analyst at his internship a week later, they'd insisted on taking him out to celebrate, and Mom had posted about it on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our son's incredible work ethic and success." My donor acquisition got a text message. His promotion got a public celebration. Even our childhood birthday parties had followed the same pattern. Marcus's parties were events. Mom would rent bounce houses, hire entertainers, invite his entire class, plus extended family. The house would be decorated to the nines, with themed everything from the napkins to the party favors. My birthday parties were smaller. More intimate, Mom would say. Just a few friends, homemade decorations, activities that were age-appropriate, and wouldn't overwhelm the other children. By the time I turned 10, I'd stopped asking for big parties. I'd convinced myself I preferred the quiet celebrations, that I was more mature, more sophisticated than Marcus with his loud, chaotic celebrations. But standing there at Northwestern, watching my family arrange themselves in perfect formation for their perfect photos, I was finally seeing the truth. It wasn't that I preferred smaller celebrations, or that I was more independent, or that I didn't need as much attention. It was that somewhere along the way, my family had decided that Marcus was the star of their story, and I was the supporting cast. He was the main character whose achievements mattered, whose preferences shaped family decisions, whose happiness was the priority. I was the reliable narrator, the one who documented everyone else's big moments, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly so that Marcus could shine. I remembered Marcus's middle school soccer games, where I'd spent every Saturday morning on cold bleachers, cheering him on, taking action shots with Mom's camera, keeping stats in a little notebook so he could track his progress. But when I'd joined the debate team and made it to the state championships, Mom had missed the final round because Marcus had a really important soccer practice that day. "You understand, don't you, honey?" she'd said. "You're so good at handling these things. On your own. Marcus really needs our support right now." I understood. I'd always understood. I'd spent my entire life understanding why everyone else's needs came first, why everyone else's achievements mattered more, why everyone else belonged in the center of the frame while I worked the camera. But understanding and accepting were two different things. At Northwestern, as I watched Dad adjust Marcus's graduation cap for the 10th time while Mom fussed over a wrinkle in her blazer, I realized that this photo session wasn't an anomaly. It was the culmination of 26 years of being edited out, minimized, and relegated to the background of my own family's story. I wasn't the family photographer because I was good with cameras. I was the family photographer because that's where invisible people belonged. Behind the lens, capturing everyone else's perfect moments, never quite in focus myself. And the most devastating part wasn't that they'd done this to me. The most devastating part was that somewhere along the way, I'd started to believe I belonged there. Something shifted inside me as I stood there holding that camera, watching my family pose for what felt like their 100th photo without me. It wasn't anger anymore, or hurt, or even disappointment. It was something cleaner, sharper. Clarity. I set the camera down on the stone ledge beside me. "What are you doing?" Mom asked, her perfectly composed smile faltering for the first time. "All day. I'm done," I said simply. "Done with what?" "We need more shots from this angle, and then we should get some candids by the water." "No," I said, and the word came out stronger than I expected. "I'm done being your photographer. I'm done being invisible. And I'm done pretending this is normal." Dad stepped forward, his voice taking on that diplomatic tone he used when he wanted to smooth things over quickly. "Rebecca, let's not make a scene. People are watching." I looked around. He was right. Other families were scattered across the lakefront area, taking their own graduation photos, celebrating their own achievements. A few were glancing our way, probably wondering why the girl in the navy dress was standing apart from her family looking like she was about to explode. You're right, Dad. People are watching, and what they're seeing is a family that spent 3 hours taking photos where one daughter doesn't appear in a single frame. My voice was getting louder, but I didn't care anymore. What they're seeing is parents who think their own child doesn't fit their aesthetic. Rebecca, please, Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the other families. You're being dramatic. That word, dramatic. It had been used to dismiss me my entire life, and suddenly I saw it for what it really was. Not a description of my behavior, but a weapon designed to make me shrink back into compliance. No, Mom. Dramatic would be if I started listing all the ways you've made me feel invisible over the years. Dramatic would be if I told everyone here how you missed my debate championship because Marcus had soccer practice. Dramatic would be if I explained how my Columbia acceptance got a 5-minute phone call while Marcus's Northwestern acceptance got a party. Marcus was looking increasingly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Becca, come on. It's my graduation day. Exactly, I said, turning to face him fully. It's your graduation day, your special day, just like every other day has been your special day for the past 26 years of my life. That's not fair, he protested. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Not how work was going, not if I was dating anyone, but how I was actually doing. When was the last time you remembered something that was important to me? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because we both knew the answer. Was never. When was the last time any of you asked me what I wanted? I continued, my voice gaining momentum. What restaurant I wanted to go to? What movie I wanted to see? What vacation destination sounded good to me? When was the last time my preferences mattered in any family decision? The silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of waves lapping against the shore and the distant laughter of other families enjoying their celebrations. You want to know what's really dramatic? I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What's dramatic is that I'm 26 years old, and I've spent so many years trying to earn a place in photos with my own family that I forgot I don't need anyone's permission to exist. I picked up my purse from where I'd set it on the ground and started walking toward the parking lot. Where are you going? Mom called after me. Anywhere but here. Rebecca, you can't just leave. We drove here together. How are you going to get home? I pulled out my phone and opened the Uber app. The same way I've been getting through life, Mom. I'll figure it out myself. But as I stood there waiting for my ride, something else occurred to me. Something that made my pulse quicken with possibility, rather than anger. Why was I going home? Home to what? To my apartment in Chicago where I'd spend the rest of the weekend replaying this scene, feeling sorry for myself, maybe calling my friend Jessica to vent about my family. To Monday morning at the office where I'd throw myself into work to avoid thinking about how alone I felt? No, I was done with that pattern too. I canceled the Uber and called Jessica instead. Hey girl, what's up? How's the graduation going? Jess, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. That trip to Portland you've been planning, the one where you're going to visit all those independent bookstores and coffee shops, the one you keep saying I should come with you on? Yeah, of course. I've been asking you to come for months. Why? Did you mean it when you said I could crash on your friend's couch? Absolutely. Sarah has this amazing loft in the Pearl District, and she's always saying she loves meeting new people. But Rebecca, what's going on? You sound different. I looked back toward the lake, where my family was still standing in their perfect formation, probably debating whether to continue the photo session without me or wait to see if I'd come back, with my tail between my legs. I'm done being the supporting character in my own life, I said. And I think it's time I started writing my own story. Okay, I love this energy, but I'm confused. Aren't you at Marcus's graduation? I was, but it turns out I don't fit the aesthetic they're going for in their family photos. Jessica was quiet for a moment. They actually said that to you? Among other things, Rebecca Marie Thompson, you get on a plane to Portland right now. I'm serious. Sarah's going to love you, and we're going to have the best weekend ever. When can you be at the airport? I checked the time on my phone. 3:47 p.m. How does tonight sound? Tonight sounds perfect. I'll text Sarah right now and let her know we're coming. Oh my God, I'm so excited. We're finally going to do this trip. For the first time all day, I smiled. A real smile. Not the forced one I'd been wearing in photos for years. Jess? Thank you. For what? For being excited about me being there, for wanting me to come, for not making me feel like I'm too much or don't fit. Rebecca, you are never too much. You're exactly enough, and anyone who makes you feel otherwise doesn't deserve you. I hung up and immediately opened the airline app on my phone. There was a flight from Chicago to Portland at 8:15 p.m. It was expensive, probably more than I should spend on a spontaneous weekend trip, but I didn't care. I booked it without hesitation. Then I booked another Uber, this one to O'Hare Airport. As I stood there waiting for my ride, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Excitement about something that was entirely mine. Entirely. My choice, entirely about what I wanted to do. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Becca, please come back. We can take some photos with you. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'm not interested in being included. As an afterthought, congratulations on your graduation. I hope the photos turn out exactly how Mom wants them. Another buzz, this time from Mom. You're really going to ruin your brother's graduation day over some silly photos? The audacity of that message took my breath away. I was ruining his day? Not them, for making me feel like an outsider at my own brother's celebration. Not them, for treating me like hired help instead of family. Not them, for decades of making me feel like my presence was something to be managed rather than celebrated. I typed back, I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not participating in it anymore. Then I turned off my phone. My Uber arrived, and as we drove away from Northwestern, away from the lake where my family was probably still taking their perfect photos, I felt something lift off my shoulders. A weight I'd been carrying for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. On the drive to the airport, I called my boss and asked for Monday off, using one of my personal days. Then I called my neighbor and asked her to water my plants. Then I sat back and watched Chicago blur past the window, feeling more alive than I had in months. At the airport, while I waited for my flight, I did something I'd never done before. I took a selfie. Not for social media, not to prove anything to anyone, but just for me. In the photo, I'm sitting in the departure lounge, my hair slightly messed up from the wind by the lake, my makeup a little smudged, wearing that navy dress that had made me feel invisible just hours earlier. But in this photo, I didn't look invisible at all. I looked like someone who had just made the best decision of her life. I looked like someone who was finally ready to be the main character in her own story. As I boarded the plane to Portland, I realized I wasn't running away from my family. I was running toward myself. Toward the version of me that existed when I wasn't constantly trying to fit into someone else's frame. When I wasn't editing myself down to make others comfortable. When I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. The flight attendant smiled as she checked my boarding pass. Portland, how exciting. Business or pleasure? Pleasure, I said, and meant it completely. Definitely pleasure. For the first time in my adult life, I was doing something purely because it would make me happy. Not because it was expected, not because it would benefit someone else, not because it was the responsible choice, just because I wanted to. As the plane taxied down the runway, I looked out the window at the lights of Chicago shrinking below us. Somewhere down there, my family was probably finishing up their photo session, heading to dinner at whatever restaurant Marcus had chosen, discussing the day's events in whatever way allowed them to avoid talking about what had actually happened. And, for the first time, I didn't care what story they were telling about me. I was too busy writing my own. Portland welcomed me with open arms and the scent of rain on roses. I landed at PDX just after 10 p.m., and Jessica was waiting for me at baggage claim with the biggest grin I'd ever seen and a sign that read, Rebecca's Liberation Tour 2023, in glittery pink letters. "You actually did it," she said, wrapping me in a hug that lasted longer than any hug I'd received from my family in years. "You just walked away from their photo session and got on a plane. I'm so proud of you I could cry." "Please don't cry," I laughed, though I felt tears pricking at my own eyes. "I've done enough crying for one day." "These would be happy tears," Jessica assured me as we walked toward the exit. "Liberation tears. Freedom tears." The drive to Sarah's loft took us through downtown Portland, all illuminated bridges and quirky late-night food trucks, the city humming with an energy that felt completely different from Chicago. More relaxed, more authentic, more like people were living their lives instead of performing them. "So tell me everything," Jessica said as we wound through the Pearl District. "What exactly happened?" So I told her. About the navy dress, about being relegated to photographer duty, about the aesthetic comment, about standing there with that camera realizing I'd been invisible my whole life. Jessica listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds of outrage or support, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with each revelation. "I can't believe they actually said you didn't fit their aesthetic," she said as we pulled up to Sarah's building. "Your own mother said that to you." The crazy part is, she probably doesn't even think she did anything wrong. In her mind, she was just trying to get the best photos possible. "The best photos of the people she thinks matter," Jessica corrected. "Rebecca, that's not normal. That's not how families are supposed to work." Sarah's loft was everything Jessica had promised, and more. Exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, bookshelves that stretched from the hardwood floors to the industrial ceiling, and plants everywhere. Real plants. Thriving plants. Not the sad little succulents I kept killing in my Chicago apartment. Sarah herself was exactly the kind of person I'd always wanted to be friends with, but had never felt cool enough to approach. She had short silver hair, paint-stained fingers, and the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and being completely comfortable with it. "The infamous Rebecca," she said, greeting me with a hug like we'd known each other for years. "Jess has been talking about you for months. I'm so glad you finally decided to come visit." "Thanks for letting me crash here on such short notice," I said. "I know this is all very last minute." "The best adventures always are," Sarah replied. "Plus, anyone who walks away from toxic family bullshit to choose themselves deserves all the support in the world. I have wine, I have chocolate, and I have a very comfortable couch with your name on it." We stayed up until 2 a.m. talking. Not about my family, not about the graduation disaster, but about everything else. Books we'd read, places we wanted to travel, dreams we'd put on hold, fears we'd never voiced out loud. Sarah told us about her art studio downtown, how she'd left a corporate job 3 years ago to pursue painting full-time, and had never looked back. The scariest part wasn't leaving the job, she said, curled up in an oversized armchair with her wine glass balanced on her knee. The scariest part was admitting that I'd been living someone else's life for so long that I'd forgotten what my own life looked like. That hit me right in the chest. "How did you figure it out? How did you know what your life was supposed to look like?" "I started small," she said. "I asked myself what I wanted for breakfast instead of just eating whatever was convenient. I bought flowers for my apartment just because I liked them, not because I was having people over. I started saying no to things that drained me and yes to things that excited me, even if they scared me. And it worked? It worked. Not immediately and not perfectly, but it worked. The thing is, Rebecca, you can't discover who you are while you're still pretending to be who other people want you to be. The next morning, I woke up on Sarah's couch to the smell of real coffee and the sound of jazz music playing softly from her kitchen. Through the enormous windows, Portland looked like a watercolor painting, all soft grays and greens under a gentle spring rain. "Good morning, sunshine," Jessica said, appearing with a steaming mug. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted. And it was true. I'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, without the usual anxiety that kept me tossing and turning. Most nights, Sarah's already left for her studio, but she left us a list of all her favorite places to explore today. Bookstores, coffee shops, galleries, vintage stores. She said we should think of it as a feed your soul tour. We started at Powell's Books, and I lost myself completely. I wandered through sections I'd never explored before, picking up books on photography and travel writing and urban gardening, subjects that had always interested me but that I'd never given myself permission to pursue because they weren't practical or career-focused. I bought 7 books that day. 7 books that had nothing to do with my job or my supposed responsibilities. Books that were purely for my own curiosity and pleasure. The total came to $127, and normally I would have felt guilty about spending that much on something so frivolous. Instead, I felt giddy. "Look at you," Jessica said as we left the bookstore with our heavy bags. "You're glowing." She was right. I caught my reflection in the bookstore window, and I looked different, lighter somehow, despite carrying an armload of books. My shoulders weren't hunched forward like they usually were. My face wasn't carrying that constant tension I hadn't even realized was there. We spent the afternoon at the Portland Art Museum, where I found myself standing in front of paintings for 20-30 minutes at a time, just absorbing them. When was the last time I'd given myself permission to stand still and just look at something beautiful without feeling like I should be doing something more productive? "You're different here," Jessica observed as we sat in the museum cafe sharing a slice of lemon cake. "More present. I feel different. I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in years." "When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because you had to, not because someone else wanted you to, just because it brought you joy?" I had to think about it, really think about it. I honestly can't remember. That's heartbreaking, Rebecca, and also completely understandable given what you've been dealing with your whole life. That evening, Sarah took us to her favorite neighborhood restaurant, a tiny Vietnamese place tucked between a vintage clothing store and a record shop. The owner knew Sarah by name, and when she introduced us, he treated us like family, bringing us extra spring rolls and telling us stories about the herbs he grew in his back garden. "This is what I want," I said suddenly, in the middle of the owner's story about his grandfather's pho recipe. "What?" Jessica asked. This feeling. This warmth. This acceptance. This sense of belonging somewhere without having to earn it or prove I deserve it. I gestured around the small restaurant, where mismatched chairs surrounded wobbly tables, and the walls were covered with family photos and children's drawings. I want to be somewhere where people are genuinely happy to see me, not where they're calculating whether I fit their image. "You can have that," Sarah said gently. "You can build that. But first, you have to believe you deserve it." "How do I do that?" "The same way you did today. One choice at a time. You chose to buy those books because they interested you. You chose to stand in front of those paintings until you were ready to move on. You chose to come here, to this trip, to this moment. Keep choosing yourself." Later that night, back at Sarah's loft, I did something I hadn't done since high school. I started writing. Not work emails or grocery lists or the practical writing that filled my daily life, but real writing. Stream of consciousness thoughts about the weekend, about the revelation at the graduation, about the feeling of discovering that I could make choices based purely on what brought me joy. I wrote about the weight of carrying a camera for other people's memories while never being in any of them myself. I wrote about the relief of finally setting that camera down. I wrote about the terror and exhilaration of getting on a plane with no plan beyond choosing myself for once. I've spent 26 years trying to be the daughter they wanted, I wrote, and I never stopped to ask who I wanted to be. The words poured out of me like they'd been waiting years for permission to exist. 3 pages became 5, then 8, then 12. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes burned, and even then I didn't want to stop. The next day was our last full day in Portland, and we decided to explore the neighborhoods outside downtown. We took the streetcar to Hawthorne, where every block seemed to contain another bookstore, coffee shop, or quirky boutique run by someone following their passion instead of someone else's expectations. In a small gallery showcasing local photographers, I found myself studying the work with new eyes. These weren't technically perfect images designed to present an idealized version of reality. They were honest, raw photos that captured authentic moments and real emotions. "You should try this," Jessica said, noticing my fascination. "What? Photography? Why not? You've been behind the camera your whole life. Maybe it's time to start deciding what deserves to be in the frame." I bought a disposable camera from a vintage store down the street. Not because I needed another camera, not because I had any plan for the photos, but because the idea excited me. The idea of taking pictures for myself, of my own experiences, from my own perspective. That afternoon, I used up the entire roll of film. Pictures of Sarah's plants reaching toward the light. Pictures of the barista at our coffee shop who had paint under her fingernails and a smile that lit up her whole face. Pictures of Jessica laughing at something ridiculous we'd seen in a shop window. Pictures of my own hands holding those books from Powell's. My own feet on the cobblestone streets. My own reflection in the window of a bookstore where I'd spent an hour browsing poetry collections. For the first time in my life, I was the photographer and the subject, the person behind the camera and the person worth capturing. On our last evening, we went to Sarah's art studio, a shared workspace in an old warehouse where a dozen artists rented space to create. Sarah's corner was explosion of color and texture, canvases covered in bold strokes and unexpected combinations that somehow worked perfectly together. "I love this one," I said, stopping in front of a painting that seemed to glow from within. It was abstract, but somehow familiar, like a feeling translated into color and light. "That's called finally breathing," Sarah said. "I painted it after I quit my corporate job. It's that moment when you realize you've been holding your breath for years and you finally let it out." I stared at the painting for a long time, feeling something shift inside my chest. "I think I'm just starting to learn how to breathe." "The best part," Sarah said, "is that it gets easier. The more you practice choosing yourself, the more natural it becomes. The more you feed your soul, the stronger it gets." That night, as I packed my few belongings back into my carry-on bag, I realized I was returning to Chicago as a completely different person than the one who had left. Not because Portland had changed me, but because Portland had given me the space to remember who I was underneath all the ways I'd learned to shrink myself. I was someone who loved books and art and long conversations about dreams and fears. I was someone who deserved to take up space in photos and in conversations and in rooms. I was someone whose preferences mattered, whose joy was valuable, whose presence was a gift rather than a burden. I was someone worth choosing. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to choose her. I turned my phone back on during my layover in Denver, and the notifications hit me like a digital avalanche. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 12 voicemails. My stomach clenched as I scrolled through the preview texts, watching the emotional progression from confusion to anger to what looked like genuine panic. The first few messages were from Marcus, sent about an hour after I'd left Northwestern. Becca, where did you go? Mom's freaking out. Seriously, can you just come back? We'll take whatever photos you want. This is really messed up. It's my graduation day. Then came the ones from Mom, starting around 8 p.m. Rebecca, your behavior today was completely unacceptable. Call me immediately. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this tantrum needs to stop. Your father and I are very disappointed in you. But by Sunday afternoon, the tone had shifted completely. The messages became increasingly frantic. Rebecca, please call us back. We just want to make sure you're safe. Honey, I know you're upset, but we need to talk about this. Where are you? Marcus said you took an Uber, but you're not at your apartment. Dad had left 3 voicemails, each one more bewildered than the last. In the final one, his voice cracked as he said, Rebecca, sweetheart, we just want to know you're okay. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Please just call us back. What struck me most wasn't the panic in their messages, but the complete lack of understanding about why I'd left. Even in their concern, there was no acknowledgement of what they'd done, no recognition of how they'd made me feel. It was all about my reaction, my tantrum, my unacceptable behavior. I started to dial Mom's number, then stopped. I wasn't ready to get pulled back into their narrative, wasn't ready to let them reframe my moment of clarity as an overreaction. Instead, I called my cousin Riley, Marcus's age but somehow infinitely more perceptive about family dynamics. Oh my God, Rebecca, finally! Riley answered on the first ring. I've been waiting for someone to call me back. What the hell happened? Yesterday? You heard about it? Heard about it? Girl, it's all anyone in the family is talking about. Aunt Patricia called my mom at 8 this morning asking if anyone had heard from you. Your parents called every relative they could think of trying to track you down. I sank into an uncomfortable airport chair, suddenly exhausted. What exactly are they saying happened? That's the thing, Riley said, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. Nobody seems to have the same story. Your mom is saying you had some kind of breakdown over the family photos and stormed off. Your dad thinks you might be having a work crisis or something. Marcus is telling people you got upset about not being in enough pictures, but even he doesn't seem to really understand. What went down? And what do you think happened? Riley was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I think they finally pushed you too far, and they're shocked that you pushed back. Rebecca, I've watched you bend over backward for that family your entire life. I've seen you make yourself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into whatever space they'd give you. What I want to know is what finally made you stop. So I told her everything. The aesthetic comment, the pattern recognition, the realization that I'd been the family photographer because that's where invisible people belonged. Riley listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of recognition or outrage. Jesus, Rebecca, the aesthetic comment? Your own mother said you didn't fit their aesthetic? Among other things. And you just left? Got on a plane to Portland? I got on a plane to Portland. I am so fucking proud of you right now, Riley said, and the fierce pride in her voice made my eyes well up. Do you know how many times I've watched you disappear at family gatherings? How many times have I seen you smile and nod while they talked over you or dismissed something you said? I thought that was normal. I thought that was just how families worked. Rebecca, no, that's not normal. That's not how loving families work. Loving families don't make you audition for your place at the table. They don't edit you out of their perfect pictures. The crazy part is, I don't think they even realize they're doing it. I think they genuinely believe they're just trying to keep the peace or make things easier. That doesn't make it okay, Riley said firmly. And honestly, the fact that they're all panicking now proves that they know exactly how much you do for them. They're just realizing what it looks like when you're not there to smooth everything over. What do you mean? Rebecca, do you have any idea how awkward yesterday got after you left? I wasn't there, but I heard from 3 different people. apparently, after you walked away, they stood there for like 10 minutes not knowing what to do. Your mom kept trying to direct the photo session, but everyone could tell something was off." Riley paused, and I could hear her settling in for a longer story. Marcus was visibly uncomfortable. "Like your cousin Emma said, he kept looking around like he was waiting for you to come back and fix whatever had gone wrong. And when other families started asking where his sister was, nobody had a good answer." "What did they say?" "That's the best part. They couldn't agree on a story. Your mom told one family that you had a work emergency. Your dad told another family that you weren't feeling well. Marcus just shrugged and said you had to leave early. But Emma said it was obvious that people weren't buying it, because everyone knows how close you and Marcus are supposed to be." The irony of that hit me hard. Everyone assumed Marcus and I were close because I'd spent years showing up for him, supporting him, celebrating his achievements. But that closeness had been entirely one-sided, built on my effort and his acceptance of it. Then what happened? Well, they finished the photos, but Emma said the whole thing felt forced, like they were going through the motions. And at dinner, afterward, your absence was the elephant in the room. People kept asking where you were, and your parents kept changing the subject. But it was weird. How was it weird? Think about it, Rebecca. You're the one who usually keeps family conversations flowing. You're the one who asks follow-up questions and remembers what everyone's been up to and makes sure quieter people get included. Without you there, it was just your parents and Marcus, and apparently none of them are very good at carrying a conversation. I'd never thought about it that way. But Riley was right. I was always the one working to connect people, to draw out the shy relatives, to bridge the gaps when conversations lagged. I'd thought I was being helpful, but really, I'd been compensating for their social limitations. Emma said there were these long, awkward silences where everyone was clearly thinking about how you would have filled the gap. And Marcus looked miserable. Like, genuinely miserable. Not just disappointed that his sister wasn't there, but like, he was finally realizing something important was missing. Did anyone defend what they did? Did anyone think they were right to exclude me from the photos? Are you kidding? Rebecca, most of the family doesn't even know what really happened. Your parents aren't exactly advertising the fact that they told their own daughter she didn't fit their aesthetic. They're letting everyone think you had some kind of mysterious emergency or breakdown. That stung, but it didn't surprise me. Of course they weren't taking responsibility for what had actually happened. It was easier to let people think I was unstable than to admit they'd been cruel. But here's the thing, Riley continued. People aren't stupid. Emma said she kept thinking about how you're always the one behind the camera at family events, and how she'd never really noticed before that you're barely in any of the photos. Once she started paying attention to that, she said it became really obvious. Obvious how? Obviously, this wasn't about you having a breakdown. This was about you finally having enough. And honestly, good for you. It's about time. My flight to Chicago was being called for boarding, but I wasn't ready to end this conversation. Riley was giving me something I'd never had before. Validation. From someone who had witnessed the family dynamics firsthand. Riley, can I ask you something? Growing up, did you notice this happening? Did you see how they treated me differently than Marcus? God, yes. But I was a kid, you know? I thought, that was just how your family worked. I thought maybe you preferred being behind the scenes or something. It wasn't until I got older that I started realizing how fucked up it was. Why didn't you ever say anything? I'm ashamed to admit this, but I didn't think it was my place. And honestly, you seemed to handle it so well. You never complained, never seemed upset about it. I thought maybe you didn't mind. I minded. I just didn't think I was allowed to mind. Rebecca, you are absolutely allowed to mind. You're allowed to want to be in your family's photos. You're allowed to want your achievements celebrated. You're allowed to want your preferences considered. You're allowed to take up space. I was crying now, right there in the Denver airport. But they were good tears. Relief tears. Years of suppressed frustration and hurt flowing out of me as someone finally saw what I'd experienced and validated that it wasn't okay. I have to board. My flight, I said, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. But Riley, thank you for seeing me, for understanding. Rebecca, I love you, and I'm proud of you for finally choosing yourself. Don't let them guilt you into going back to the way things were. I won't. I can't. I finally know what it feels like to breathe. During the flight back to Chicago, I scrolled through more of the messages that had accumulated over the weekend. There were texts from extended family members who had clearly been enlisted in the search effort, messages from old family friends expressing concern, even a few from co-workers who had somehow gotten pulled into the drama. But the most revealing messages came from Marcus, sent late Sunday night. Becca, I keep thinking about what you said at the lake, about asking how you're doing. I honestly can't remember the last time I did that, and that's really messed up. I know I haven't been a good brother to you. I know I've taken your support for granted. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Mom and Dad are freaking out because they can't reach you, but I think I'm freaking out for different reasons. I think I'm realizing how much I don't know about your life, about what makes you happy, about what you want. Please call me when you get this. Not because Mom and Dad want you to, but because I want to talk to my sister. Really talk. Not just the surface stuff we usually do. Those messages hit differently than the ones from my parents. There was something in Marcus's words that felt like genuine recognition rather than damage control. Like maybe, in my absence, he was finally seeing the relationship we actually had instead of the relationship he'd assumed we had. I thought about Riley's observation that Marcus had looked miserable at dinner, like he was realizing something important was missing. Maybe he was finally understanding that having a sister who showed up for everything wasn't the same as having a sister who was actually included in everything. Maybe my absence was teaching him the difference between being supported and being seen. As the plane descended toward Chicago, I could see the city lights spreading out below us like a constellation. Somewhere down there was my apartment, my life, my job, my routine. But I wasn't the same person returning to that life as the one who had left it 3 days ago. I was someone who had tasted what it felt like to be wanted instead of tolerated, to be celebrated instead of managed, to take up space instead of apologizing for existing. I was someone who had remembered that I had preferences and desires and dreams that mattered. And I was someone who was finally ready to stop performing the role of the grateful, undemanding daughter and start being the whole, complex, deserving person I actually was. My phone buzzed with a new text from Mom. Your flight lands at 9:47, right? Dad and I will pick you up. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I'll take an Uber home, thanks. I'll call you tomorrow, when I'm ready to talk. For the first time in my life, I was setting the terms of engagement with my family. I was choosing when and how to have conversations that involved my emotional well-being. And as scary as that felt, it also felt like coming home to myself. I spent Tuesday morning sitting in my therapist's office, finally understanding why I'd been coming to these sessions for 2 years without making any real progress. Dr. Martinez had been telling me for months that I needed to examine my family dynamics, but I'd always deflected, insisting that my anxiety and people-pleasing tendencies were just personality quirks I needed to manage better. Tell me about the graduation, she said, settling back in her chair with the kind of patient attention that used to make me uncomfortable. Today, it felt like a lifeline. So I told her everything. The navy dress, the photo sessions, the aesthetic comment, the flight to Portland, the weekend of remembering who I was when I wasn't trying to be who everyone else needed me to be. Doctor. Martinez listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small notes, but mostly just holding space for me to process what had happened. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Rebecca, in all the time we've been working together, I've never seen you this clear, she said finally. You're speaking with a kind of certainty I haven't heard from you before. I feel different, I admitted. Like something fundamental has shifted. What do you think shifted? I thought about it, trying to put the feeling into words. I think I finally stopped believing their version of who I am. And what was their version? That I'm too much, too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding. That I need to be managed and minimized and edited down to be acceptable. That my job in the family is to make everyone else comfortable, even if it makes me disappear. Dr. Martinez leaned forward slightly. And what's your version of who you are? I'm someone who notices things, who remembers what matters to people, who asks questions because I genuinely care about the answers, who feels things deeply because that's how I connect with the world. I paused, surprised by how clearly these thoughts were coming to me. I'm not too much. I'm exactly as much as I need to be. Rebecca, do you realize what you just did? You just described yourself with compassion, instead of criticism. You reframed your supposed flaws as strengths. She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space or having feelings or wanting to be seen and heard and valued. There's something else, I said. Something I've been thinking about since Portland. I think I finally understand why they needed me to be small. Tell me about that. It wasn't really about me at all. It was about them. I felt the pieces clicking into place as I spoke. My mom has spent her whole life performing perfection. The perfect house, the perfect marriage, the perfect family. But perfection requires control, and I was the variable she couldn't control. Dr. Martinez nodded encouragingly. I ask uncomfortable questions. I remember things people want to forget. I notice when someone is being excluded or when the story doesn't add up. I don't laugh at jokes that aren't funny, and I don't pretend everything is fine when it's not. And how did that threaten their narrative? Because their narrative required everyone to play along. Marcus had to be the golden child who could do no wrong. Dad had to be the successful provider who never struggled. Mom had to be the devoted mother who never played favorites. And I had to be... I trailed off, the realization hitting me fully. What did you have to be, Rebecca? I had to prove that their family was loving and inclusive, the daughter who was so grateful for any attention that I'd never ask for more, the sister who was so devoted that I'd never question why my devotion wasn't returned, the family member who was so easygoing that I'd never disrupt their perfect image by having needs of my own. And when did you stop playing that role? The whole system fell apart. That's why they panicked when I left. It wasn't because they missed me or were worried about me. It was because my absence made it impossible to maintain the illusion. Dr. Martinez sat back in her chair, and I could see something like pride in her expression. Rebecca, what you're describing is a classic family system where one person carries the emotional labor for everyone else. You've been the family's emotional regulator, the one who absorbs tension and smooths over conflicts and maintains connections. And when I stopped doing that job, the dysfunction became visible to everyone, including them. That's why your brother sent those texts recognizing that he doesn't really know you. That's why your parents are scrambling to get you back. Without you managing the emotional climate, they're all having to face the reality of their relationships with each other. I thought about Riley's description of the awkward dinner, the uncomfortable silences, the way Marcus had looked miserable even in the midst of his celebration. So they didn't exclude me from the photos because I was the problem, I said slowly. They excluded me because I was the solution, and solutions aren't supposed to be visible. Explain that. I was the one who made their dysfunction work. I smoothed over the favoritism by being grateful for scraps. I covered for the emotional neglect by being self-sufficient. I compensated for their inability to connect with each other by being the bridge between everyone. I paused, feeling something shift in my chest. They needed me invisible because if people saw me clearly, they might start asking questions about why I was working so hard to hold everything together. And what questions might they ask? Why does Rebecca do all the emotional labor? Why is she always behind the camera? Why doesn't she ever seem to get the same support she gives everyone else? Why does she look so tired all the time? I felt tears starting, but they weren't sad tears. They were relieved tears. People might realize that our family only looked functional because I was sacrificing my own needs to make it work. Dr. Martinez handed me the tissue box, but she was smiling. Rebecca, do you understand what just happened? You just diagnosed your own family system. You just identified the role you've been playing and why it was unsustainable. And I understand why I had to stop playing it. It wasn't just about the photos. It was about refusing to be invisible anymore. What do you think will happen now? I thought about that question for a long time. I think they'll try to pull me back in. They'll apologize for the photo thing, but they'll frame it as a misunderstanding. They'll promise to include me more, but they won't actually change the fundamental dynamics. They'll want me to go back to being the family emotional manager, just with slightly better photo placement. And how do you feel about that? Exhausted just thinking about it. I laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. It was the laugh of someone who finally sees the game clearly enough to stop playing it. I can't go back to that role, Dr. Martinez. I can't go back to being responsible for everyone else's emotional comfort while pretending I don't have emotions of my own. What would it look like to have a relationship with your family without playing that role? I don't know. I honestly don't know if it's possible. The thought scared me, but it also felt liberating. Maybe they're only capable of loving the version of me that makes their lives easier. Maybe when I stop making their lives easier, they'll stop loving me altogether. How do you feel about that possibility? Terrified, I admitted. But also, okay. Because I finally understand that what they've been giving me wasn't really love anyway. Love doesn't require you to disappear. Love doesn't make you audition for your place at the table. Love doesn't edit you out of the picture to make everyone else look better. I thought about the weekend in Portland, about Jessica's immediate excitement when I'd called, about Sarah's instant acceptance, about the Vietnamese restaurant owner who had treated me like family within minutes of meeting me. I know what real love feels like now, I said. I know what it's like to be wanted exactly as I am. And I can't unknow that. Dr. Martinez looked at her watch. We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you something. What do you need to feel safe as you navigate this transition? Boundaries, I said immediately. Clear, non-negotiable boundaries, and a support system of people who see me clearly and want me to succeed. And what would those boundaries look like? No more managing everyone else's emotions. No more being the family photographer while everyone else gets to be in the pictures. No more sacrificing my needs to make other people comfortable. No more accepting crumbs of attention and calling it love. Those are good boundaries, Rebecca. How do you plan to maintain them? By remembering who I am when I'm not trying to be who they need me to be. By staying connected to people who celebrate me instead of tolerating me. By choosing myself even when it's scary. As I left Dr. Martinez's office, I felt something I'd never felt before. Genuine self-compassion. For the first time, I wasn't angry at myself for playing the role I'd played in my family. I wasn't ashamed of how long it had taken me to see the truth. I wasn't criticizing myself for being too sensitive or too demanding. I was proud of myself for surviving a system that required me to be invisible. I was proud of myself for carrying everyone else's emotional burden for so many years without losing my capacity for kindness. I was proud of myself for finally choosing to be seen, even when being seen meant risking everything. Walking back to my car, I thought about a conversation I'd had with Sarah in Portland. She'd told me about leaving her corporate job, about how terrifying it had been to disappoint her family's expectations. The hardest part, she'd said, wasn't dealing with their disappointment. The hardest part was realizing that their love had always been conditional on me being who they wanted me to be. Once I stopped being that person, I had to grieve the relationship I thought I had with them. I was starting to understand what she meant. I was grieving the family I'd thought I had, the one where I was loved and valued and seen. But I was also discovering the family I actually had, the one where I'd been useful but not loved, managed but not valued, tolerated but not seen. And maybe, just maybe, I was opening space for the family I could have in the future, one built on honesty instead of performance, on genuine connection instead of assigned roles, on mutual respect instead of conditional acceptance. But first, I had to stop being willing to disappear for their comfort. I had to stop being their solution and start being their daughter, even if they couldn't handle having a daughter who refused to be invisible. 3 months later, I was standing in my own apartment, looking at the walls I'd finally started decorating, with things that mattered to me. The framed photos from Portland hung next to prints I'd bought at local art fairs. My bookshelf overflowed with the novels and poetry collections I'd been accumulating. The disposable camera photos from my weekend of self-discovery were scattered across my coffee table, waiting to be arranged in an album I'd actually look at. My apartment had become a reflection of who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone else's version of acceptable. The conversation with my family had finally happened 2 weeks after I'd returned from Portland. Not because they'd figured out how to apologize properly, but because I'd decided I was ready to have it on my terms. We'd met at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop downtown where the ambient noise would prevent anyone from raising their voices too much. I'd chosen the time, the place, and the agenda. For once, I was directing the scene instead of just appearing in it. Mom had started with what I'd expected. "Honey, I think there was a misunderstanding at Marcus's graduation. I never meant to hurt your feelings about the photos. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom," I'd said calmly. "You told me I didn't fit your aesthetic. You spent 3 hours having me photograph everyone else and never once suggested including me. That wasn't an accident or a miscommunication. Dad had tried to smooth things over with his usual diplomatic approach. Rebecca, you know we love you. Family photos are just complicated. There are lighting considerations and composition issues." "Dad, stop." I'd held up my hand. "I'm not here to debate photography techniques. I'm here to tell you that I'm done being the family photographer while everyone else gets to be in the pictures. I'm done managing everyone else's emotions while pretending I don't have any of my own." Marcus had been quiet through most of the conversation, but when he finally spoke, his words carried weight. "Becca, I've been thinking about what you said at the lake, about how I never ask how you're doing. You were right. I don't know anything about your life outside of what you do for our family." "What do you want to know?" I'd asked, genuinely curious whether this was real interest or just guilt. "Everything. What you're reading, what you're excited about, what keeps you up at night worrying, what makes you laugh. I want to know my sister, not just the person who shows up when I need something." That conversation had led to something I'd never had with Marcus before. Actual relationship. Not the one-sided support system I'd been providing for years, but genuine reciprocal connection. He'd started calling me regularly, not when he needed something, but just to talk. He'd ask about my work projects, remember details from previous conversations, share his own struggles and uncertainties instead of just his successes. 2 weeks ago, he'd texted me a photo of a book he'd bought after I'd mentioned loving the author. "Started reading this because you recommended her," he'd written. "Now I understand why you love stories about people finding themselves." It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was real progress. Marcus was learning how to be a brother instead of just being someone who had a sister. My parents were more complicated. Mom had made several attempts to make it up to me by suggesting elaborate family photo sessions where I would be prominently featured. She still didn't understand that the problem wasn't photo placement, but the fundamental way she saw my role in the family. Dad had started making an effort to ask about my work and my interests, but our conversations still felt stilted, like he was working from a script titled, "How to Connect with Your Daughter." The effort was genuine, but the foundation of understanding wasn't there yet. The real changes in my life had come from the relationships I'd built outside my family. Jessica and I had started planning regular trips together, little adventures, where we could explore new places and ideas without having to consider anyone else's preferences. Sarah had become a genuine friend, someone I texted when I read something interesting or saw art that moved me. I'd joined a photography class at the community college, finally learning to use a real camera for my own artistic vision instead of just documenting other people's memories. My instructor, a woman named Elena who'd been shooting professionally for 20 years, had looked at my first assignments and said, "You have a really interesting eye. You see things other people miss." "I've been looking through viewfinders my whole life," I'd told her. "No," she'd said, studying my photos more closely. "You've been looking at life through other people's viewfinders. This is different. This is you choosing what deserves to be seen." She was right. The photos I was taking now were nothing like the family portraits I'd spent years capturing. These were honest, sometimes messy images that showed real emotion and authentic moments. I was learning to see beauty in imperfection, strength in vulnerability, truth in the spaces between what people wanted to show and what they actually felt. Last month, I had my first solo photography exhibition at a small gallery in Wicker Park. It wasn't a big deal, just a local showcase for emerging artists, but it was mine. The opening night had been terrifying and exhilarating. Jessica and Sarah had come, along with Elena and several classmates from my photography course. Marcus had come too, which had surprised me. He'd stood in front of one photo for a long time, a self-portrait I'd taken in my apartment, surrounded by all the books and art and small treasures that made the space feel like home. "I've never seen you look like this," he'd said finally. "Like what?" "Like yourself. Like someone who's comfortable in her own skin." "I'm learning how to be," I'd admitted. "I'm proud of you, Becca. Not for the photos, though they're amazing. I'm proud of you for figuring out who you are." My parents hadn't come to the exhibition. I'd sent them an invitation, not because I expected them to attend, but because I wanted them to know this part of my life existed. Mom had texted back saying they had plans that evening but would love to see photos from the event. It had stung, a little, but not in the crushing way it would have before Portland. Their absence was disappointing, but it didn't diminish my achievement. I was learning to celebrate my own victories without needing their validation. The biggest change, though, was in how I moved through the world day to day. I'd started saying no to things that drained me, and yes to things that excited me, even when they scared me. I'd stopped apologizing for having opinions or taking up space or needing things from the people in my life. At work, I'd finally applied for the creative director position I'd been wanting for over a year. During the interview, when they'd asked what my greatest strength was, I'd said, "I notice things other people miss, and I'm not afraid to point them out anymore." I'd gotten the job. I'd also started dating again, but differently this time. Instead of trying to be whoever I thought each person wanted me to be, I was showing up as myself from the beginning. It was scarier, but infinitely more honest. The people who didn't like me for who I actually was disappeared quickly, which saved everyone time and energy. The people who did like me really liked me. Last week, I went on a third date with David, a librarian who made me laugh and listened when I talked and never once suggested I was too much about anything. When I'd told him about my family situation, he'd said, "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot for a long time. I'm glad you finally put it down." "I'm still figuring out what to pick up instead," I'd admitted. "That's the fun part," he'd said. "You get to choose." Today was Marcus's birthday, And for the first time in our adult lives, I wasn't organizing his celebration. I wasn't coordinating with our parents about gifts or restaurant reservations or making sure everyone knew what time to arrive where. Instead, I'd called him directly and asked what he wanted to do for his birthday. Honestly, he'd said, I'd love to just hang out with you. Maybe grab dinner somewhere we can actually talk? So that's what we did. Just the two of us at a small Italian place he'd chosen, having the kind of conversation we'd never had before. He told me about the anxiety he'd been feeling about his new job, about how he'd been thinking about therapy after seeing how much it had helped me, about how he was trying to build friendships that weren't just based on shared activities, but on actually knowing each other. I've been thinking about the graduation photos, he said over dessert. About what Mom said to you, about the aesthetic thing. Yeah? I keep wondering if I would have said something if I'd really understood what was happening. Like, in the moment, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't fully get it. What do you get now? That it wasn't about the photos at all. It was about Mom needing everything to look perfect, even if it meant making you invisible. And I just went along with it because it was easier than questioning it. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Marcus, you were celebrating your graduation. You weren't supposed to be managing family dynamics. But I could have said something. I could have insisted you be in the photos, or asked why you looked upset or just noticed that something wasn't right. You're noticing now, I pointed out. You're asking questions now. That matters. I want to be a better brother to you. Not just now, but going forward. I want to actually know you, not just expect you to always be there for me. I want that too, I said. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I can't go back to being the person who manages everyone else's emotions while pretending. I don't have any of my own. I can't be the sister who shows up for everything while getting nothing in return. I don't want you to go back to that either. I'm starting to realize how exhausting that must have been. It was. But it was also the only way I knew how to be loved. You don't have to earn love, Becca. You just deserve it. For being who you are. After dinner, as we walked back to our cars, Marcus stopped suddenly. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you happy? Like, actually happy? Not just okay or fine or managing, but genuinely happy. I thought about the question seriously. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have known how to answer it. Happiness had seemed like something other people experienced. While I focused on being useful and accommodating and grateful for whatever attention came my way, yeah, I said, surprised by how easily the word came out. I am happy. Not every day, not about everything, but I'm happy with my life. I'm happy with who I'm becoming. Good, Marcus said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. You deserve to be happy. So do you, I told him. And Marcus, you don't have to be perfect to deserve love either. You just have to be real. Driving home that night, I thought about how different this birthday celebration had been from all the elaborate productions I'd organized for Marcus over the years. This had been simpler, quieter, more genuine. Neither of us had performed for anyone else or tried to create the perfect Instagram moment. We'd just been two siblings getting to know each other as adults. In my apartment, I looked through the photos from my Portland trip one more time before finally putting them in the album I'd bought weeks ago. The girl in those pictures looked peaceful but uncertain, like someone who was just beginning to understand her own worth. I took a new photo of myself right there in my living room, surrounded by my books and art and the life I'd built according to my own preferences. In this photo, I looked confident, settled, like someone who knew exactly who she was and wasn't apologizing for it. I printed both photos and put them side by side in the album, the before and after of learning to choose myself. My phone buzzed, with a text from Jessica. How was dinner with Marcus? Really good, I typed back. He's actually trying to be my brother instead of just someone who has a sister. Character development. I love to see it. I know, right? Turns out people can change when you stop enabling their bad behavior. Revolutionary concept. How are you feeling about everything? I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built. By choosing authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort, myself over everyone else's version of who I should be. I'm feeling like myself, I typed. Finally. And for the first time in my 26 years, that felt like more than enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.